Thank you, Adam. And welcome to our webinar. Today we are hearing from Rabbi Marci Bellows. Rabbi Bellows serves as a rabbi at Temple B'nai Torah in Wonton, New York. She also writes the Reform Really column featured bi-monthly on the New York Jewish Week website. Welcome, Rabbi Bellows.
Thank you so much. What an honor to be here. I am overjoyed to have this opportunity to speak with all of you, and I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to be here with me. I have been delighted to share over the past weeks and in the coming weeks for the book of the Exodus my approach to studying Torah, which hopefully you've been having fun with and appreciating and having it spark meaningful conversations and thoughts and even connections with the divine in your own lives. Today I will be talking about this week's parasha in particular, Parashat Bishalach, which you may or may not have had an opportunity to read my drash, but I'll talk a bit about it with all of you today. I'll also be, because it's relevant, sharing with you some of my own story, my personal story, how I became a rabbi, what went on in my childhood to cause such a crazy thing, and then also my general approach to studying Torah, which hopefully will be helpful as you move forward and continue your own studies, whether you are a beginner or have been studying for quite some time. So we're going to start by thinking about Parashat Bishalach. And this Torah portion, if it's possible to say, is one of my most favorite. I'm sure every rabbi can say that in some way, I hope, about every portion. Maybe not Tazria Mitzorah, but that's another story. So for Parashat Bishalach, we have this incredible image that's so poignant and pervasive in our lives as Jews. We have the Israelites crossing to freedom through the Sea of Reeds, and here I've given you a graphic that I found online of us walking on dry land with the walls of the sea on either side. And of course, we have the beautiful and moving Song of the Sea, Moses' song, plus the beautiful song of Miriam and the women as well. And I think it's significant that we have music playing such an enormous role in our lives as Jews and in our joyous moments. When we escape to freedom, we don't know what else to do with ourselves but break out into song. And as human beings and as Jewish human beings, I think that's significant as we think about the role that music plays in our lives, in all the different realms of our lives. Of course, one of my favorite teachings about the Song of the Sea and Miriam's song as well is we all know, thanks to Debbie Friedman's beautiful piece, Miriam's song, that Miriam and the women danced with timbrels in their hands. And we learn from Midrash, because it's understandable that the rabbis would say, how did they have timbrels with them? We think to ourselves, if we had to leave our homes quickly, if we had to escape, we were given an order thanks to, unfortunately, due to an emergency, what would we take with us? I'm sure so many of us would say we would take photographs, we would take important documents and records. And so our ancestors faced that choice, and the women made sure to take timbrels with them. And so the rabbi said, why did they do that? And they say that the women, especially Miriam, had such faith that everything was going to turn out okay, that they made sure to bring the instruments with them for their celebration. And so we have the role that music plays in our lives. So I've gone forward to a slide that says my story, why music is so important to me. And I've given you a picture of my parents, Burl Bellows and Carrie Bellows. Actually, this picture was just taken recently at an engagement party for my fiance and for me, because we're getting married and we're very excited. So excuse that little sidebar. my mom actually has served as a cantor for my entire life, and I'm very proud of that. Though she didn't attend HUC, she started out as a mere soloist, we might call it, but really no soloist is ever just a soloist. And over 26 years in one pulpit, educated herself, served the congregation so beautifully, and really grew up on the Bema, and I therefore grew up with my mom as a clergy person on the Bema, and so in that sense I am a CK, I'm a cantor's kid. And our entire family is very musical, and some of you may relate to this. When music or the arts or any particular interest really is pervasive through the entire family, it becomes a part of the family's identity. And in my family, both my mother and my father are very connected with music. It was impossible to go a Saturday or Sunday afternoon in my household without hearing my dad tinkling away on the piano or plucking a guitar, my mom rehearsing for a concert or for services or teaching voice students, and even my sister and my two brothers are very involved with music. And so as I debated entering the rabbinate, I knew, though I didn't feel I was brave enough to become a cantor and all that that involves, I knew that music was going to be a very important part of my rabbinate, and that the musical component and the makeup of the music of each service was going to be crucial to me. So in this week's Devar Torah, as I thought about the role of song in liturgy, and you may recall that I talked about all the different versions of Adon Olam, with Rock Around the Clock being my favorite, we all know that that place in our hearts and in our guts that the music hits, those favorite melodies that take us back to a particular moment or place. So, by the way, the Adon Olam is Adon Olam Asher Malach B'Terem Kol Yetzir Nivra Leid Nasa B'Chefza Kol Azai Melech Shemo Nikra Adon Olam Asher Malach B'Terem Kol Yetzir Nivra Ba 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 Shabbat. Thank you very much. You'll be able to get autographs later. But music, I think, helps us transcend intellect and being too cerebral and being stuck in rational thought, and instead takes us to feeling and to an experience of our souls that maybe for some of us pure thought or pure words don't provide, though for many intellectual study can be just as spiritual. So that's a bit about my story just for the moment. I can pause for questions. Are there any?
No questions at this time.
Okay, and then everyone, if you have questions or thoughts, please feel free to share them on your screen. I'd love to hear from you so that this can be even more of a back and forth and a discussion. So in addition to feeling that music is an important way in to understanding and experiencing our Judaism, I also feel that way about Torah. And I think we all have the opportunity to understand Torah in our own way. And I, related to this week's Torah portion, I was thinking about the character of Nachshon, who you may have heard of. Nachshon is a character that we hear about in relation to the first steps that our ancestors took into the Sea of Reeds, so that as we waited for the waters to part. There is a midrash that looks at what it must have been like to stand there on the shore of the sea, to be told by Moses everything's going to be okay, and yet to still see the sea flowing and full in front of us. And so the character of Nachshon is said to have been maybe even afraid of water and afraid of swimming, but had so much faith. Here we get that idea of faith again, just like with Miriam and the women, where Nachshon felt he could walk into the water, and that if Moses and therefore God said everything was going to be okay, that therefore it had to be true. So Nachshon walked forward step by step into the water as it got deeper, and it went up to his knees and then to his hips and his chest and goes all the way up to his chin and even to his nose, right below his nose, and he's in the water, had to get that far for it to part. And so he was the only one who was brave enough to do this. So I think Nachshon can be our guide, our role model in how we approach Torah, that it can be scary, especially if we're diving in for the first time, or approaching a particular text in Talmud or in Midrash, or even in the prayer book for the first time, that we can remember Nachshon and how scary it must have been to walk into the water, but to have that faith that it is going to turn out okay, and we will be safe in the pools of Torah. So we are going to take some steps into a deeper relationship and connection with Torah. So I wanted to go over with you my thoughts about approaching Torah, and you'll see this in some of the Divrei Torah I've shared over the past few weeks, and you'll continue to see it. And here's where I'd really love to hear from you all about ways that you've seen this in action, or what, if you're an educator or a clergy person or even a lay leader, how have you experienced this and either made it available to others or have been the recipient or the participant in this kind of approach to Torah. So I have 4 main thoughts in my personal approach. Torah can be made relevant, and that shouldn't be such a leap, but sometimes it is. Sometimes we feel like, well, why are we studying this? Why is it so important that we keep coming back to this text? Why do we have to read from it? And so we have to work to make this text relevant. Next, learning can be fun. It doesn't have to be so serious and we have to speak in low voices, but we can actually have fun with the text and interact with it in a different way. And I'm going to be going into each one of these topics more fully. Something that's really my own personal MO that you'll see in just a minute and you've already seen is that we can use pop culture to inform our understanding of our heritage. That's something I happen to personally be very passionate about, and I think can help connect our own modern lives to our ancient heritage. And then last but not least is that everyone can do it. You don't need a teacher or a rabbi to make the text accessible to you. You, every single person, has the ability to access text, him or herself. So now to break down each of these topics even more. And again, I encourage you to share your own experiences with these kinds of approaches. So how can we make Torah relevant? Why are we still reading this text that is thousands of years old? I think about the bar and bat mitzvah students that I meet with each week who are going to be preparing a Devar Torah, a teaching of Torah, to share up on the bima during their big day. And these 13-year-olds are looking at this text that seems so foreign, and despite our efforts to translate it clearly and in a way that we can understand, it still can seem far away, inaccessible, unreachable. And yet, with a teacher or even with a partner to study Torah with, we have the opportunity to break it down for ourselves and to find something that relates to our own lives. Otherwise, why are we still reading it year after year? We are doing it because it's still so connected to our lives. Even the portions of the text that are antithetical to how we feel now. When we wrestle with text, as the God wrestlers that we are, we have the opportunity to agree and disagree as long as we still keep interacting with the text itself. And that's what I feel God wants from us, what our ancestors want from us, what our tradition wants from us, is to still wrestle with and encounter this very holy text. And to find one word, one sentence, one narrative, one law that means something to us. And if it's something that upsets us, that's okay too, because that can inform how we approach our lives today. So Torah can be made relevant. And learning can be fun. It's important to remember that ultimately there are few wrong answers when we interpret Torah. Because really, how do we know? If there are 70 faces to Torah, there are at least 70 ways of looking at a particular text according to tradition, then your voice, your interpretation, your way of looking at things is just as important and just as holy as the rabbis and the sages of 1,500, 2,000 years ago. And that can be both a very humbling realization as well as, I think, very freeing. I am very blessed to work with a Torah study group, a Parashat HaShavua, Torah portion of the week, Torah study group on Monday afternoons where we just look at the text together. And we've been working with the Peshat, the simple meaning of the text. We're not worrying about any particular lens such as Midrash or Rashi. Rather, we are just working with the text itself and looking at what we can glean from it before we turn to other layers. And what the group has discovered is that their interpretations can be just as wise and just as moving, just as profound as our sages of so long ago. And when you remember that our interpretations can be just as valid, I think it frees us up to not feel as scared when we approach Torah. So I see a comment just came in.
Yes, we have a question or comment. I have found there to be a big difference when Torah study is clergy-led. I find their knowledge and leadership makes a more meaningful study group. And this is from Linda Nussbaum.
Hi, Linda. I think that's a very interesting point. So it sounds like, Linda, your comment is when you have a knowledgeable leader that can facilitate the discussion, that can be very helpful. And I think that's true. There can be different goals, I guess, when we study Torah. How do we want to illuminate the text? And it can be difficult when you have questions that perhaps someone who's more familiar with the text or has studied more, he or she will be able to help with, or at least point to the group in the right direction of how to find the answers. But I've been parts of groups of lay leaders, of congregants, even of elementary school students and high school students, where they are able to come up with so much of the answers on our own. So there are benefits to both, to being in a clergy-led Torah study and also to feeling free to gather with other interested friends or fellow congregants who want to study text as well. I guess I want to make it available and make that idea available to anyone who's interested in studying text. Your voice is part of the discussion. Learning can be fun, and we can enjoy the play involved in studying Torah. It can be playful. So then, again, my own personal quirk, I guess. In my family, we made up the word weirditude, and so it's my weirditude, is that I love pop culture. I'm a bit of a pop culture fanatic, and if you follow me on Twitter at all, I'm at Moosh2, M-O-O-S-H number 2. You'll see that pop culture is related to a lot of what I do Judaically. In fact, on High Holy Days, as I prepare my sermons, my big sermons each year, for me it's meaningful to make one of them related to pop culture in some form, either related to movies, music, even comic books, television, reality TV, in some way, so that people feel Judaism is not far away, but rather can be right here in our lives. So I've given you some pictures of some current Jewish and classic Jewish stars, because I think we can look at their lives as forms of Torah, what we learn from them. Some of them are very Jewish in their work. They mention being Jewish, or it becomes a part of what they put together, as well as those who just seem to emanate their Judaism in what they do, even when it is related to secular topics. Jon Stewart, of course, infuses so much of what he does brilliantly on The Daily Show with Judaism. Mel Brooks, so much of his films are Jewish. Sarah Silverman, who can be so brilliant and also so controversial, you may know that her sister is a rabbi. and their family is very involved in Judaism. Then there are other parts of Judaism, or parts of pop culture where Judaism pops up, and I've given you deliberately the logo from the musical Rent, where one of the main characters, Mark Cohen, is Jewish, and he makes little flippant remarks throughout the show about being Jewish. And then also, what has been fascinating is Sex in the City and how often it comes up in my discussions, especially with conversion students. Some of you who watched the show may remember that the character of Charlotte decided she wanted to convert to Judaism, and you watched that process as she tried to approach a rabbi to work with her towards her conversion. And that was a major pop culture moment for all of us who are interested in working with conversion students who want to be a part of the Jewish community. So how can we use movies and music and books and Broadway shows and television to make Torah more accessible? That can be the Torah of our lives. It can be the lessons we learn from these parts of pop culture. And then, finally, I believe very strongly that everyone can do it. And this goes back to the question of lay-led groups, rabbi-led groups. And I go to this text from Parashat Nitzavim, from Parashat Nitzavim, that sums up a lot of my philosophy. I just want to put my screen away just a minute. Surely this instruction, which I enjoin upon you this day, is not too baffling for you, nor is it beyond reach. It is not in the heavens that you should say, who among us can go up to the heavens and get it for us and impart it to us, that we may observe it? Neither is it beyond the sea, that you should say, who among us can cross to the other side of the sea and get it for us and impart it to us, that we may observe it? No, the thing is very close to you, in your mouth and in your heart, to observe it. Torah is not beyond our reach. It's not far away, and we don't need to send a messenger somewhere to get it for us. We don't, and I'm not trying to vote myself out of work or say you don't need clergy, but rather you can do it on your own. You don't need a mediator, a middleman or woman to go and to get Torah, to get Jewish tradition, to get these lessons for you, but you can access them yourself. Not that it isn't meaningful to work with a teacher, but it's not, they're not mutually exclusive. You have the opportunity to study on your own. The thing is very close to you, in your mouth and in your heart. If we study and we listen to what our hearts tell us and what the words of our mouths say, we can live Torah and we can feel Torah. So I can pause before I go to the next slide if there are any questions. Not yet.
There is one question, actually. Can you give an example of a bar or bat mitzvah student who used pop culture in their bar or bat mitzvah speech?
Oh, what a great question. I'm trying to think of one. We had one recently. I had a student who was very much into superheroes and read a lot of comic books and drew and doodled a lot of comics in his own life. And I happen to have a fascination with the history of Jews and comic books. So I at least had a working knowledge of some of the characters to work with him. And as we were talking about our tradition and his particular Torah portion, we realized the links between some of our patriarchs, in particular some of our ancestors, and Captain America, who was his favorite character. And so his Devar Torah was about how we can relate to the text and to link it with our understanding of comic books, and particularly Captain America. And he used it as a way of also then making some promises of what he wanted to do next in his life as a Jewish man, of the kind of ethical life, the mitzvot, and the efforts to repair the world he wanted to undertake. And he linked it all through and used Captain America as a theme throughout. And so that was really fascinating. And people were right on board with him, and you could see people smiling and nodding in the congregation as he gave his speech. And so for him, it was a way in that I don't know he would have felt free to take otherwise. And it was a terrific speech. Are there any other questions?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. So please do let me know if you have any, because this is our final official slide before we can just talk a little bit less formally. I thought about, therefore, what we can do to make sure, in addition to these other areas, having Torah study be fun and having being able to include pop culture and feeling an invitation that everyone can participate in the study of Torah and the study of our tradition, what can we do to back up the Jewish part of it? So we're not going into it blind and without a foundation of Jewish knowledge, but what can we do to have a complete Jewish experience together? So I thought about these 3 parts that I have here on the left of the screen. Hopefully, we can, as children, as adults, engage in some kind of formal Jewish education. And in lingo terms, we usually use that to refer to religious school, Sunday school, Hebrew school, and even adult education classes, adult bar and bat mitzvah classes, those kinds of formal learning experiences that are regular and that are led by teachers and clergy. And those are so valuable. And I encourage you to look for opportunities to take part in these. If you never had a bar or bat mitzvah, perhaps you look for an opportunity at a local synagogue to take part in a class. Hopefully your local synagogue also has a rich selection of adult education classes. Then you have informal Jewish education. And when we say informal Jewish education, we're usually referring to things like youth group for our youth, camp experiences, and then for adults, that's where we get into retreats, women's retreats, men's retreats, family retreats, elder hostels that have more of a Jewish approach. Those opportunities to leave the boundaries of a formal classroom setting and instead to learn in a more experiential, hands-on way. Now, ideally, these 2 forms of education are also not exclusive, but have a lot of overlap. Formal Jewish ed can include opportunities to learn and to experience and be hands-on that aren't just reading from a book or being lectured at. And informal Jewish ed can have a foundation in classic text, in educational pedagogy, and can be very rich in information. But then also we have our secular life and all of the things we learn Jewishly and non-Jewishly in our secular life. And we combine all those together and mix them up, and that creates our Jewish self. And we all have the opportunity, if we feel we're missing part of this, to enhance it. So through religious schools, through learning with teachers and rabbis, through our own opportunities to go to camp. And a lot of the local URJ camps have facilities where our congregations can go and have retreats where we can learn informally with our clergy and with our teachers. We should go to Israel. If we haven't been, or if we haven't been in a long time, we should go. We should engage. I mean, the election just happened now, and we have the opportunity to learn a lot about what's going on in Israel today, to influence what's going on there, particularly with relation to our own progressive values of equality and of being tolerant and welcoming of so many Jews of different kinds. It's our responsibility to go to Israel and to learn about it. And finally, our life experiences can relate to so much and can teach others about Jewish life, about being a good person, being a mensch, leading us to influence and to be a role model, much like we turn to our ancestors and to our sages and to those who came before us as role models. We can be that in the here and now to so many others. And so we mix all these parts together too, and we have an opportunity to create and build our own Jewish self.
We do have a few more comments
Great, wonderful.
and questions. Okay, we have one from Hilda who wants to know, are we going to get into the actual portion of the text for this week's portion, and in addition to what you've already mentioned?
Okay, yes, we can definitely do that. We can look at the text even more if you'd like. I have no problem with that. I wanted to also make sure to do kind of a meta discussion of my approach to Torah study, which is hopefully what you've been gathering, so that your own study can be enhanced, especially as you go through the submissions I've made for each Monday. And then there was a, what was the other question? I'm sorry.
Basically, that was it. Are we going to get more into the actual text for that? That was that particular question, and we have quite a few more comments here.
Okay, so we will come back, if hopefully, to looking. We can look more in depth at the text itself. So, what else do we have?
Okay, we have a comment from Brenda. Torah study is the highlight of my week. No matter how many times I've read the Torah, I come away with new knowledge and thoughts. I would encourage joining a Torah study group. Our Torah study group has lively discussions. We have a question from Marcia. Where is the line, if any, between using pop culture and disrespect for tradition? As a rabbi, what guidelines would you use?
Oh, excellent question. I would think that part of that comes down to intention, to kavanah. How do we intend to use this text? Does it enhance our understanding of the tradition? Does it take away? So, asking, does pop culture disrespect the tradition? I don't think it has to. For instance, you may or may not have noticed, depending on what type of music you listen to, what genres. So far, every title I've used so far in the Divrei Torah each Monday has been a song title or lyric. That's a little way that I use pop culture to bring a smile to the reader's face if they catch the reference, to maybe say, hey, that's a rabbi who's not disconnected from modern life or from, what I see as my secular, normal, quote-unquote life. But also, there's kind of an unconscious part to it where next time you hear that song, you'll think of this Devar Torah. So for instance, I had one that was, and we were just talking about it before the conference call, Say My Name, which is a Destiny's Child song. Say my name, and it was Beyonce singing the lead there. But next time you hear that song, you'll say, oh, I remember that Devar Torah, and I remember the URJ. And so it doesn't just work in one direction. It's not just that pop culture is brought into our Torah study, but then consequently, Torah study is brought into our pop culture. Next time, after I talk to this child about Captain America, for instance, next time he looks at Captain America, he'll remember his bar mitzvah, and he'll remember the good feeling of being up there on the bima, of having prepared so hard to read from the text, and to be a part of this, thousands-year-long tradition. So my secret hope is that it begins to work both ways, and our pop culture can be infused with just as much Judaism. Ideally, our everyday lives would be infused with Judaism. That's, I think, one of the goals of informal education, of camp, of retreats, is to see that you can live day in and day out a life that is engaged in the world around us, but that also looks at the world through a Jewish lens. So that's where I feel, when you ask if there's a line between being disrespectful, I would hope that we use it as a way to add to our lives rather than to detract from it.
We have quite a number of comments now asking about, or more or less related to the comment before, or we can study any particular aspect of the text. For instance, we have this from Julie. Would you please offer any insights regarding the Song of the Sea, elements, structure, and messages?
Absolutely. Please hold as I go through and get the resources out.
Okay, in Plout Revised, I see that on page 438.
So let's take a look at the Song of the Sea itself, which if you're using a different book is, we can look at the song itself, which is Exodus chapter 15, verse 1. And immediately, hopefully, the book you're looking at has conveyed it in the visual structure that it takes in the Torah itself. Perhaps you've been a part of a congregation where the Torah has been unrolled at Simchat Torah around the whole sanctuary or around your whole social hall. And you have an opportunity to see what the majority of the Torah text looks like in its columns. What immediately pops out at you when you do that is the few exceptions to those straight columns. You take a look at the Song of the Sea, and it's not just prose that you would look at like any other column of text. Rather, it's written in these broken up sections, often 2 or 3 per line. And the interpretation I've heard most often of that is it visually creates a sense of poetry, a sense of movement, and a sense of the water, the waves of the water. And so even as we're reading this text from Moses and the Israelites' song, we see the water in front of us. So we have at chapter 15, verse 1. Moses and the Israelites sang this song. And the imagery that's used here is very much imagery of wartime, which I think is quite interesting when we look at the different images of God throughout our Torah. We have God at other times being compassionate, at other times being vengeful. And here we get the warrior God who has triumphed. I think that's particularly meaningful when we think of the hardening of Pharaoh's heart that we kept encountering throughout the 10 plagues. Which I know my Torah study group really wrestled with quite a bit. That the gray area where we know Pharaoh treated the Israelites terribly, but that God seemed to make the treatment even worse. By hardening Pharaoh's heart, it seems to take some of the free will, perhaps, away from Pharaoh, which is not to say that Pharaoh didn't treat us terribly on his own, but what role did it play that God manipulated, in a sense, the situation even further? So we had the 10 plagues, and now we're being freed, and we have this imagery of God as a warrior, that God has triumphed gloriously. And a lot of the language is language of defeat, of defeat of the Egyptians, of a military triumph on our part. We also have the very familiar words that pop up in the Song of the Sea that become a part of our ritual, of our liturgy, and that is at verse 11. So if you happen to have a text in front of you, you can turn to verse 11, but I will read it. The Hebrew should immediately be familiar. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar ba'kodesh, nora tehilot oseh seleh. Who is like you, O God, among all the other gods, among the celestials? We, in our liturgy, sometimes translate that differently. We shy away, perhaps, from what the text might intend. If we're asking God, who are you among all the other gods, that's recognizing that there are other gods. We're saying God may be the best and may be the strongest and maybe the mightiest, but it is a recognition that Adonai is not the only God out there, which I think is fascinating to wrestle with a bit. So mi chamocha, who is like you among all these other gods, Adonai, and who is like you? We often translate it as majestic in holiness, nedar b'kodesh. And I think it's worth considering, why do we pull this text out, and why does it become a part of our liturgy so that we sing it all the time? Not just the words themselves, because of course they're important words that we are declaring during our prayer, but what does it say that we're pulling a text from this moment, looking at the context of Mi Chamocha, that it is our moment of freedom, of God also showing the greatest evidence of God's strength in our collective history. We celebrate it every single year at Passover, that God redeemed us. God heard our suffering, our hundreds of years of slavery, and God frees us, and we sing about it. So in that moment, that Mi Chamocha moment in our liturgy, where we are thinking about redemption of the past and praying for some type of redemption in the future, a time of peace, a time where no one is enslaved, what do we have in the future? Now, the moment of freedom is also, in a sense, a rebirth, because though we've been Jews up until this point, we are really going to be becoming the people of Israel following this. So there is a rebirth of our people that happens at this point, and that really is solidified and formalized with the giving of the Torah and the Ten Commandments at Sinai in Parashat Yitro. So we are in our infancy as a people here officially, where we are about to become the civilization and the people that we are as Jews and as Israelites. And of course, that moment of the Ten Commandments in Parashat Yitro becomes the ultimate moment for Shavuot, the holiday where we celebrate the receiving of the Torah. And it becomes our first attempt at building law codes, at pulling together this tradition, these traditions we've been observing, these rituals that have become a part of our lives as Jews, and formalizing them. It's our first attempt. And therefore, a lot of Exodus that follows begins to lay out some of the laws that God intends for us to follow. And we touch on them over the coming weeks. Some of them make a lot of sense, especially in the Ten Commandments you see that, and the laws that follow. But not all of them do, but that's how our people is set up. And we distinguish between chukim and mishpatim, between laws that seem to make sense to us logically as human beings and laws that we follow just because God says we need to follow them.
We do have a few more questions.
Yes.
We have one follow-up from Julie. Please offer reflections on miracles in Judaism, Jewish miracles, which you've already touched on a bit, but if you wanted to expand.
So the one I shared that I shared in the Devar Torah is an incredible miracle I felt I experienced in my life. Was that moment? It might seem so minor, but that moment of climbing Masada, of struggling with the climb in midday, which was absolutely ridiculous for my sister and for me to attempt, but that though the storm clouds were approaching, somehow it didn't start raining until the second we reached the top. I believe, personally, that there are miracles around us all the time, that there is evidence of God's presence around us all the time. That may not be the most rational point of view, especially given the Reform movement's history as being very rational, very logical, being formed in the Enlightenment. But I happen to feel that if you but open your eyes to them, these miracles are around us all the time. The miracle of life, of the gift of life that we have around us, however long or short it may be. The miracles of nature, the beauty of nature around us. And so though we have these major miracles that we experience in the Exodus from Egypt, I don't think the miracles stop. They maybe are not as formal. They certainly may not be as large. But I like to think that they still occur. Now, when I say that, a lot of people will then counter with, well, what about the bad things that happen? And I feel that even in the bad things, you find evidence of the good things. I feel that even in some of the tragedies that have befallen our people, most notably, of course, the Holocaust, there were moments of miracles where people were given the strength to survive one more day, where people were given the ability to help save someone else. And I think there are those little miracles along the way.
Okay. Here's a question from Linda. Is it thought that Miriam wrote the Song of the Sea?
You know, there is a line of thinking about that, and I wish I could quote for you where it comes from. Some do suggest that. Part of the evidence is the fact that her song that she begins at verse 20 of the portion begins with the same words. Shiru Adonai ki ga'o ga'a. It's the same words that Moses starts the song with. And, you know, it's natural to wonder, could she have been the one to write this song, but it was taken away from her? It was attributed to Moses because somehow that would be more acceptable in our traditionally patriarchal tradition. That being said, it's incredible her song is included here at all. I think it's worth noting the exceptions when a woman is named, when her words are included. Here is a song sung by a woman leading all of the women in dance. And though it may not have been traditional to include so much about women at the time, and though she may not be given the attribution of the Song of the Sea, she is called a prophetess here, Miriam HaNeviah, Miriam the prophetess. She is interestingly only identified as Aaron's sister in verse 20, which brings up other questions about could these have been two different stories that were later combined, where Aaron and Miriam were siblings and Moses was someone else, but we wove them into one story. But no matter what, her song is included, and that's something worth celebrating. What else?
We have a question from Estelle. When did the Jewish people drop their belief in many gods and switch to belief in one God?
That is, so a belief that many gods exist versus our belief in one God. Because from the very beginning, according to tradition, what makes Abraham the first Jew is that he accepts monotheism. He accepts Adonai as the one and only God of the Jewish people. It's a fascinating question that's worth looking into, of where, and it's not just when does the belief switch, but when do we start kind of squelching the idea, the acknowledgement that other people may believe in other gods, or that there may be other gods out there. Because throughout the Torah, there is a recognition that other people are praying to other gods. And this Michamocha ba'elim Adonai, these Elim, these other gods, we also then take El, the singular of Elim, and we decide to make that one of the names of our God. So we take these other names and make them our God, to say, no, Adonai is the only God. Adonai may have all these other names, but it's still just the one God that we're talking about. So when exactly that shift took place is a fascinating question that is really worth looking into. I wish I had the exact era for you.
Mm-hmm. We have a few comments, not really questions, about from various folks. Oh, let me see. Maybe one just came up. It's basically statements about different study options that are available and that are conducted by various people, either people who are on the call or at their temples.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of not a question. Okay. I'm not seeing any particular questions at this time.
And I appreciate those who are sharing their comments about some of the wonderful Torah study opportunities that they've had. I love that. I love hearing that you're engaged in study and that you enjoy it, and that your synagogues provide opportunities for you to have that kind of lively text discussion. I think that's one of the ways in which we keep our tradition alive, and that is our responsibility. It's worth it to continue. I hope I encourage everyone on the call to, if you're interested in any of these particular topics, to look into them, particularly Miriam's role throughout all of this. She pops up in so many interesting ways throughout the Exodus, and though there is a dearth of positive depictions of women through a lot of the oral Torah, like Talmud, like Midrash. With Miriam, the rabbis are particularly giving. She is given a lot of responsibility when it comes to the role she plays in her parents' giving birth to Moses, in the role she plays overseeing his growth as a child and his development, and then even her role as a prophetess throughout the rest of the Exodus story, the redemption from slavery and moving forward. And so if that's something you're interested in looking up, I encourage you to look further into it, because her role as a woman is really quite extraordinary. And if that interests you, I encourage you to look into that more. What else can I tell you?
Okay, we have a question. Is there a woman modern day that you think faced a modern day exodus of sorts?
Is there a woman modern day that you think faced a modern day exodus of sorts? That's a good question. It's a fascinating question. Certainly the women who led the women's rights movement come to mind in more of a national level. And then I believe Jewishly, women like Sally Priesand lead the exodus of us from a movement that was not as welcoming and equal towards women, but then made it so that rabbis and cantors and all of our Jewish leaders could be women as well. So any of the women who led women's suffrage, the women's rights movement, but then also those in our own movement. Rabbi Miri Gold actually comes to mind as well in Israel, as she is leading the fight to get Reform rabbis of all kinds, of all genders, to be recognized as equal to rabbis of the other movements.
And to be paid.
And to be paid,
manner, right?
yes, well, nationally, yes, to get the same salary, exactly, that the Orthodox community rabbis are given as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We have a lot of questions and comments popping up now. I don't know that we'll be able to get to all of them.
Oh, I see someone mentioning, yes, Anat Hoffman, absolutely, from Iraq, from the Israel Relations Action Center. For sure, Anat Hoffman would be an example of that.
Okay, and we do have a question as to whether or not there will be another webinar in which we delve more deeply into the text of the book of Exodus. And we can say at this time we don't have one scheduled. We will have one most probably for the book of Leviticus. But if we do have the demand for it, there is a possibility that we can do one.
Terrific.
Okay, a number of comments about Anat Hoffman.
Yeah. Oh, it's so wonderful that you're all so excited.
Yeah.
about Anat Hoffman. Those of you who know, she is really doing so much to further women's involvement, and really any group that feels unwelcome in Israel, in the general society, through Women of the Wall, of course, and women should be able to pray equally at the wall and be able to wear talitot and pray the way we deserve to be able to pray. And also, Iraq fights for so many equal rights for groups in Israel. So they are just an incredible organization, and Anat is a big part of that.
Okay. And we're getting more comments based on your comments about that and about the Exodus of Women. Mary Gold's activism is on behalf of liberal rabbis.
Yep. Yes, rabbis, men and women.
Mm-hmm.
And it's incredible, and it's for not just Reform rabbis, but it's conservative, Reconstructionists. It's for everyone who's not the sanctioned Orthodox rabbis of Israel. And so there are these women who are really fighting the fight, and there are men who are fighting the fight too for all. And so luckily, God willing, we're facing a time where there will continue to be these miracles that are both hopefully created by God, but also furthered by these incredible human beings we have the honor of knowing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think that probably brings us just about to a close. Adam, how are we doing on time?
We are right at 2 o'clock.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining the webinar and for learning with us today. And I believe it will be posted also on YouTube. The recording of it will be posted at some time in the near future.
Thank you all.